Hi, I'm Chad with Move Forward Guitar. This lesson is from our course, Music Theory 2. All the lessons for this course are free on YouTube, so you can follow right along with the playlist or look in the description below for links to the rest of the lessons. To accelerate your learning though, I highly recommend you download the corresponding Music Theory 2 workbook and eGuide. To learn more about the workbook and eGuide, click the link on the screen or look in the description below. Welcome to Music Theory 2, Lesson 10. In this lesson, I'm going to talk about major scale keys. So in the previous course, Music Theory 1, I briefly touched on keys and explained what a key was. And I explained that keys refer to songs. So for example, you'd say something like, this song is in the key of C, this song is in the key of G, etc. I also mentioned that keys relate to major scales because if you say that a song is in the key of C major, for example, it means that all the harmony, all the melody, everything in that song is straight out of the C major scale. It can go out of the key at times, but the majority of the song is going to be in the key of C major, which means that the notes that create the chords, the harmonies, the melodies are all coming from the C major scale. So if we look at this chart again that we looked at in the last lesson, I mentioned that if you looked down this row, those were all the major scales. So you had A major scale, A sharp major scale, B flat major scale, etc. So that would also mean that those are all the keys of the major scales. So for example, all of these, you could say this is in the key of A, this is in the key of A sharp, etc. So that would mean if I was playing a song and everything revolved around a C major chord, and the notes that I was using to make up the different chords, the different melodies, and everything in the song were coming out of the C major scale, that song would be in the key of C. So when you think about major scales, you can think about them as keys as well when you're talking about songs. And in the last lesson, I was talking about how it's easy to figure out the letter names for a major scale because it just goes in the alphabetical order, the musical alphabetical order, and then you just have to find where sharps or flats go. And then I gave you this chart to give you a quick reference to be able to look that up. But really, you don't have to worry about this many major scales. Really, you only need to worry about this, what's on this chart right here. If we go back to the other one, these were all the enharmonic equivalents. So A sharp is the same as B flat. C sharp is the same as D flat. If you were to play those notes on your fretboard, they're the exact same note, they just have different names, and that's determined by the musical situation you're in. But when you're talking about keys and major scales, you really don't have to worry about all of the different enharmonic equivalents. The only ones you have to worry about are F sharp and G flat. And that really eliminates most of the places where you run into something where you have something like a B sharp or a C double sharp or an E sharp, because those are technically not notes that you'd find on your fretboard. A B sharp is just a C note, a C double sharp is really just a D note, an E sharp is really just an F note, and so on. So instead of saying that something's in the key of A sharp, you'd actually just use B flat and use the B flat major scale, because the B flat major scale doesn't end up with any of those weird double sharps or something like an E sharp or anything. And you actually have less flats, so you have a lot less flats than you have sharps. And that also relates to musical notation, because music notation, you have something called key signatures, and that's in the top left hand of what's called the staff, where it shows a bunch of sharps or flats together. You've probably seen it before if you've ever looked at notation. That's quickly telling you what key the song is in. Well, there's no such thing as 10 sharps when you're looking at music notation, which A sharp has, A sharp major scale or the key of A sharp. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's no key signature that has 10 sharps, but there is a key signature that represents B flat that has 2 flats in it. So really, you can just look at this chart that I've created that's condensed and only worry about these major scales and these major scale keys, and you only have one spot where there's an enharmonic equivalent that you can choose from either with F sharp and G flat, and that's because F sharp has 6 sharps and G flat has 6 flats, so they both have the same amount of sharps or flats. So one's not easier to use than the other in that respect. And in music notation, there is a key signature for each of those. There's a key signature for F sharp and there's a key signature for G flat. And don't worry too much about this if this is confusing. If you don't know anything about music notation, just realize that when you're looking at major scales, you can now look at this chart instead of the one that I showed you in the previous lesson that listed out all the enharmonic equivalents. You can look at this condensed version and you'd have, for example, the A major scale or something in the key of A, the B flat major scale or something in the key of B flat, and so on. You don't have to worry about A sharp major scale or the other ones that I took out. In music notation, there's one that's not listed here, and that's the key of C flat, but you don't really need to worry about that for now. It's really not important for what we're doing at this point. So another thing to understand about keys is that you have what are called sharp keys and flat keys. And the key of C major, or the C major scale, I've mentioned before, is the only key without any sharps or flats. So a C major scale is really easy to build. It's just C to E, F, G, A, B back to C, just following along with the musical alphabet. And there's no sharps or flats to worry about, so that's your scale right there. You know it right there. So if you're playing the piano, it's just all the white keys. If you started on C and played those in order, the white keys in order until you hit the next C, you've played a C major scale. You don't have to worry about any of the black keys. So C has no sharps and flats, and then everything else that you have listed on this chart are your sharp keys. And a sharp key just means that it has a sharp in it. So you can see that all of these listed besides C, which I said doesn't have any sharps and flats, has at least one sharp in it. So that means it's a sharp key. And being a sharp key doesn't mean that it has to start with a sharp like this F sharp down here. You can see that all of them besides F sharp start with a natural note. It just means that there's at least one sharp in one of the notes in that key. And what I have listed right here are all the sharp keys in order, starting with 1 sharp, 2 sharps, 3 sharps, 4 sharps, 5 sharps, 6 sharps. And when you're dealing with music notation and key signatures, there's actually one more sharp. There's one more sharp key that has 7 sharps, and that's C sharp. But for now, you don't really have to worry about that. It's more likely that you'd say something's in the key of D flat instead of the key of C sharp. So those are the sharp keys. Here are the flat keys. And again, flat just means that at least one of the notes in the key has a flat in it. It doesn't have to start with a flat like this F doesn't. And again, you can see that I just started with C, which is the key without any sharps or flats. And then I went to the key that has 1 flat, which is F. And then B flat has 2 flats. E flat has 3 flats. A flat has 4. D flat 5. G flat 6. And then in music notation, there's one more. That would be C flat, but don't worry about that for now. So now you can use these two charts to quickly look up your sharp keys or your flat keys and quickly look up where the sharps or flats go. And there's some tricks to help you start memorizing this, and I'm going to show you something called the circle of fifths in a second, which we'll just briefly touch on in this lesson. But you can use this sharp key chart that I've given you and the flat key chart here, and I'll show you tricks for how you can find where the sharps go in all the keys or in all the major scales. So like I said, C doesn't have any sharps or flats, so you can easily write out a key of C major or a C major scale. You just write out C, D, E, F, G, A, B, back to C. There's no sharps or flats on anything, so that's really easy. The next one, which has 1 sharp in it, is G. And the way you can find that if you didn't have this chart in front of you, you always go 5 letter names, 5 notes up from the last scale. So we start in the key of C, C major scale. We go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Our next key with the next sharp in it is G, which you can see right here. And that means that G has 1 sharp because the key of C has no sharps. And there's 2 easy tricks that you can use for knowing where that sharp goes. The first trick is that it just goes on the 7th note of the key you're on. So the 7th note of the G major scale is F, so that gets the sharp. Or you can use the previous scale that you were on, the previous major scale, and count up 4 this time. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So in the key of G, F gets the sharp. And then to figure out your next key, which gets 2 sharps, you just do the same thing. So you start on G this time, count up 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That means D is your next scale with the next sharp in it. and that sharp goes on the 7th note, or if you're counting in the key of G, it would go on the 4th note, which you can see right here is a C, so C gets the sharp, and you always keep the previous sharp that you had from the last key, so F sharp is always going to stay there now. So D has 2 sharps in it, it gets the F sharp that you carried over from G, and the new one is on the 7th note, which is C. Then you can do it again, count up from D, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Your next major scale with 3 sharps now is A, you can see that here, and the 7th note gets the new sharp, and you always carry over the sharps from the previous scale. So you have C sharp being carried over, and you have F sharp being carried over. And you just keep doing that. You can do that all the way through. And that's a trick that you can work on over time so that you can do it in your head if you don't have this chart in front of you. But if that's confusing, don't worry too much about it for now. You have the chart. You can always use that as a reference. It's another thing we'll keep coming back to, but I just want to touch on it for now. And with the flat keys, you have to do it differently. So again, we're just starting with C that has 0, F has 1, and the way you know which one to go with the flat keys is this time you count over 4 instead of 5. Oops, that's supposed to be a 3. This is a 4. So from the C major scale, we count over 4. That's F. That means F is our next major scale, and that has 1 flat because C had 0 flats. And the flat always goes on the 4th note of the scale you're in. So B gets the flat in the key of F major. So with the flat keys, it might be a little easier. You just count over 4 with the previous major scale to find out which key is next, and then in that key you count over 4 again to find out which note gets the flat. So if you do that again, from F major, if we count over 4, B flat is our next key, which gets 2 flats this time because F had 1. Count over 4 in B flat. E is the note that gets your flat. You always keep the flat from the previous key. So you have 2 flats, it's B flat and E flat. And you just do that over and over until you get all the way to G flat. And if you wanted to do it again, you would end up with C flat, and that would give you 7 flats. But don't worry too much about that for now. Just like with the sharp keys, if you wanted to do it again after F sharp, you would end up with C sharp. And here's something called the circle of fifths. And I don't want to spend too much time on it because it can be kind of confusing. There's a lot of stuff you can do with it, and it can be a little overwhelming. That's why I give these 2 charts with the sharps and flats, because I think it's easier to visualize for our purposes right now. But you can see the circle of fifths is a tool that one of the things it shows you quickly is which keys have sharps and which keys have flats. So you have C at the top that has 0, and then when you go around clockwise, you're going in fifths, just like we did. You count up 5, C, D, E, F, G. G is your next one that has 1 sharp. And a way you can reference which note gets the sharp is if you go from G, which is the one we're on, to find out what this 1 sharp is, you skip back to F, that's the one that gets the sharp. So you know that G has 1 sharp in it and it's an F sharp. Or if we go further, so now we're going from G to D, you count up 5, that's D. D is the one that gets 2 sharps now because G had 1 sharp. To find out what the new sharp is, go back 2, it's a C, so that means that D has an F sharp from the previous one that you carry over and a C sharp, and so on. You go all the way until you've hit C sharp right here, which has 7 sharps, but really you can end right here for now. You don't really have to worry about C sharp. If you're dealing with music notation, you would have to, but right now I don't think it's that important. And then going the other way, you can actually call this the cycle of force when you're going counterclockwise. Again, we start on C, just like we did on the previous chart. You would count up 4 to get your next note, so C, D, E, F. That's your next one. Since C has 0, F gets 1 flat, because going counterclockwise with the cycle of force, you're finding your flats. Going clockwise, you're finding your sharps. So clockwise is sharps, you can call that the circle of fifths. Counterclockwise is flats, you can call that the cycle of fourths. And this one, to figure out which one gets the flat, you actually just go up 1, down, or down the cycle of fourths to the B flat, so we know that F has a B flat. And then doing it again, if we want to find out which one has 2 flats, we go from F to B flat. You count up 4, F, G, A, B. So B flat is the key with 2 flats in it. And to find out which note, the new note that gets the flat, you go up to here. It's an E flat, so we know it's E flat. So B flat, the key of B flat has a B flat, which is obvious because it starts with the B flat, and we've carried it over from the F major scale, and it gets an E flat. So that's a way you can use the circle of fifths or cycle of fourths, but a lot of people get confused by this, so if it's confusing to you, don't worry too much about it. Just use these two charts. The one where I've drawn out the sharp keys right here, and this one where I've drawn out the flat keys, and then I showed you the tricks for how to find these. And again, don't worry if this is like overwhelming to you about trying to memorize it or even knowing why you need to memorize it for now. Just use these charts as a reference. They're in your eGuide. We'll keep coming back to them, and eventually this will all start clicking as to why you need to know this stuff and how you can start doing it in your head really quickly. But for now, I just wanted to give you these charts and touch on these, and like I said, we'll just continue to build on this. So that's an explanation of major scale keys. In the next lesson, I'm going to talk about the natural minor scale. Look in your Music Theory 2 workbook for step-by-step guidance on how to retain this information and what to do next. And remember, all the charts and diagrams for this lesson are in your Music Theory 2 eGuide for you to reference at any time.